1985. A billionaire brewing dynasty demolishes its own headquarters. Not because they failed, not because they were bankrupt, because they believed they were too small. So they made a decision. They borrowed $500 million. At the time, their entire company was worth only $100 million. 3 years later, they were worth $9 billion. 20 years after that, nothing. Not reduced, not weakened, gone. This wasn't scandal, it wasn't fraud, it wasn't corruption, it was strategy. A belief that bigger meant safer. A conviction that scale guaranteed survival. A single decision that quietly set a timer on a 135-year dynasty. This is not just a beer story. This is a power story. The paradox. The Stroh family had survived everything. Prohibition, the Great Depression, 2 world wars, industry consolidation, distribution wars, advertising battles. They were disciplined operators, patient capital, family controlled. No reckless expansion, no ego-driven acquisitions. For over a century, they grew slowly, methodically. They protected cash, they respected margins, they understood cycles. So what changed? How does a family that survived prohibition collapse in peacetime? How does resilience built across 5 generations dissolve in one? Framing the power failure. At its peak, Stroh's Brewery was the 3rd largest brewer in America, a national brand, billions in valuation, massive distribution footprint. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Power architecture had weakened. Governance became diluted. Decision-making concentrated. Leverage replaced discipline. And as the company expanded, ownership fragmented. By the end, nearly 30 heirs were tied to the empire. Different risk tolerances, different ambitions, different fears. When power spreads without structure, instability follows. The Wheelbarrow origin. The story began in 1849. Bernhard Stroh arrived in Detroit with $150 and a German beer recipe. He brewed in a small operation, sold beer door to door with a wheelbarrow. He introduced fire brewing, a technique uncommon in America at the time. Quality built loyalty. Discipline built margins. The family reinvested profits, expanded cautiously. When Prohibition arrived in 1920, many breweries collapsed. Stroh survived by pivoting. Ice cream, soft drinks, malt extract, they endured. When Prohibition ended, they returned stronger. Through the Depression, they managed cash carefully. They avoided overextension. They built distribution infrastructure. By the 1960s and 70s, they were a regional powerhouse, still family-owned, still disciplined, still cautious, until caution started to look like weakness. The $500 million gamble. In the early 1980s, consolidation accelerated. Anheuser-Busch and Miller dominated national advertising. Smaller regional breweries were disappearing. Peter Stroh, 5th-generation leader, faced a decision: remain regional and risk irrelevance, or go national. In 1982, Stroh borrowed $500 million to acquire Schlitz. At the time, Stroh's book value was only around $100 million. They borrowed 5 times their company's value. Overnight, they became the 3rd largest brewer in America. It looked brilliant. Revenue surged, distribution expanded nationally. Wall Street applauded. Valuation climbed toward $9 billion, but something fundamental had changed. Debt replaced flexibility. Interest payments replaced strategic patience. Margin for error vanished. Growth was no longer optional. It was mandatory, because debt demands growth, and growth under pressure demands risk. The industry shift. While Stroh was servicing debt, the market shifted. Light beer exploded in popularity. Miller Lite and Bud Light invested hundreds of millions in advertising, national campaigns, massive media buys, celebrity endorsements. Stroh didn't have that kind of capital. Most cash flow went towards servicing loans, so they competed on price. Volume increased, margins shrank, market share became expensive. The brand identity blurred. Was Stroh premium? Was it value? Was it regional? Confusion replaced clarity. Debt tightened its grip. The collapse accelerates. In an attempt to reposition, Stroh launched a major rebrand. It failed. Sales dropped 40%, the largest decline in beer industry history at that time. Instead of retreating, leadership doubled down. They acquired another struggling brewer. Another debt-heavy deal. An analyst described it perfectly. 2 sick chickens do not make a healthy one. Now the company wasn't just leveraged, it was structurally unstable. Cash flow shrank. Debt remained fixed. Interest payments did not care about brand confusion. The dynasty was no longer adapting, it was reacting. Generational decay. The fifth generation inherited scale, but not the hardship that built discipline. Earlier generations survived collapse threats personally. They felt scarcity. They feared extinction. They respected leverage. This generation inherited abundance. And abundance changes psychology. Governance did not modernize. Ownership was divided among dozens of heirs. Strategic unity fractured, dividends slowed, then stopped. Internal panic grew. When family-owned companies expand faster than governance structures evolve, emotional decision-making increases. Fear replaced patience, and fear inside leveraged systems accelerates collapse. By the late 1990s, the situation had become impossible to ignore. What once looked like bold expansion now revealed itself as overreach. Cash flow tightened, debt payments mounted, confidence eroded. The empire that had symbolized wealth and dominance for decades was now fighting for survival. There were no dramatic headlines, no single catastrophic event, just the slow, suffocating weight of financial reality. Assets were sold piece by piece. Iconic holdings that once defined prestige were quietly transferred to new owners. Divisions were separated. Brands were split. What had taken generations to build was dismantled in a matter of years. In 1999, the company was formally broken apart for approximately $350 million. $250 million of that went directly toward repaying creditors. $100 million remained, an amount that sounded substantial, but in context was a shadow of former glory. Divided among 30 heirs, the inheritance shrank quickly. After taxes, legal fees, settlements, and outstanding obligations, each heir received only a fraction of what had once represented billions. By 2008, even that was gone, from a peak valuation of $9 billion to zero. Not because of scandal, not because of government seizure, not because of war, but because of leverage, because of overexpansion, because discipline, the very principle that built the empire, was abandoned. Was the collapse inevitable the moment they borrowed $500 million? Or did the erosion begin earlier? Perhaps when patience started to feel like weakness. Perhaps when governance stopped evolving. Perhaps when scale became more important than control. Power does not collapse overnight. It erodes through decisions, through incentives, through misaligned risk. The Stroh family survived prohibition because they adapted cautiously. They collapsed in prosperity because they expanded aggressively. Leverage magnifies success, but it also magnifies fragility. And when the environment shifts, fragility becomes fatal. This was not just the story of a brewery, it was the story of power architecture, of how dynasties fall not from attack, but from internal structural decisions. The $500 million bet did not just buy scale, it removed optionality. And once optionality disappears, so does resilience. If this breakdown changed how you see leverage and generational power, subscribe to Architects of Power and tell me, was the real mistake the debt or the belief that they were too small to survive without it?